Hey, welcome to The Segway.
The best thing that happened to you on a Thursday.
That's right, recording live in LeBron's backyard.
So, on this episode, we have our VP, James Renner. I am so excited to bring this interview. I didn't know this was going to happen this quickly. So, James was, it's so weird to call him James. He was a teacher of mine in like 2013 at the University of Akron. But since then, before then, he's been writing. He wrote a book on Amy Mihaljevic, who is... he gets into it in the podcast. It's like a mystery, murder mystery, that happened in, Bay Village, right? And he's written lots of books since then. I don't know how many, actually. We read a couple. We read one for this one. We listened to his podcast, which is out, called The Philosophy of Crime, which is up to season 2. Season 3 is on its way.
Craziest thing listening to his podcast, because I tend to listen to if I'm not driving, I listen to podcasts late at night, which isn't that late really. It's like 6:30, but in wintertime it's dark out, so I'm alone. I got these big headphones on. I'm walking Annie and it's dark. And his podcast, he has such like you guys will hear, soft, soothing voice, like a voice a lullaby voice. And so he's like talking about this theory. I'm going to tell you this theory that is really interesting. But every now and then there's music that just comes out of nowhere. So it's nighttime, walking Annie, la 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 la. He's very softly speaking my ear, and then boom! I'm like, God damn! Like, this is the most scared I've ever been in my life.
His podcast is super interesting.
It's amazing,
I
absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Please, if you care, if you like serial, if you like true crime, anything like that, check out The Philosophy of Crime. It is
good.
Thought-provoking. It's just amazing, well told, great stories.
But he's working, like you said, he's working for TV right now. He's been on the radio here. He's been on the Alan Cox show. Actually, I can't believe we got him on.
We actually kidnapped him and we tied him up and said, all right, give us 45 minutes and we'll let you go.
Like, I feel like the ugly kid who asked out the pretty girl to the prom, But
she's probably said yes because her friends told her to, and now he's laughing at us.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, they terrible.
It felt like a pity date.
A fold-out table. But anyways, we don't want to waste any more time because this interview is gold. So please, go ahead. I'll let you.
Oh, anyway, put your hands together. No, don't do that. You're probably alone. Anyway,
pour
James...
yourself a nice cup of tea. Find a nice comfy spot on your couch. And prepare for your earbuds to be soothed by the very calm and relaxing tone and thought-provoking stories by James Renner.
Is it possible that by covering a crime, a writer causes that crime to happen? By giving the details of a crime permanence in print, do we make the crime permanent too? Hold on to your butts. This episode gets weird. There's the signpost up ahead. Next stop, the Twilight Zone. I'm James Renner, and this is The Philosophy of Crime.
We're here with James Renner. How you doing, James?
Good. Thanks for having me in the studios, the Segway Studios.
That's right. It's very high class.
It's never been referred to that before.
Yeah, I can see empty command strips on the wall. It's great. All right. So thank you for coming in. I know we had to kind of reschedule. It was a little fast, a little quick. But
it's okay. I'm going to hit the IHOP down the road after this, so we're all good.
There you go. We just hit the Chipotle. All right. So let's just kind of dive right in. So for you, true crime has been something in your life since you were 7, 8, like very young.
Very young. Yeah. I think the way it kind of happened was all about this girl, Amy Mihaljevic, who disappeared in 1989. They found her body a few months later. It's an unsolved murder. And at the time, I was living with my mother up in Rocky River, and next door to Rocky River is Bay Village. Rocky River is a very blue-collar, low-income. Bay Village is very ritzy. And so for a girl to go missing from Bay Village, it was a big deal. Because if it could happen to her, it could happen to anybody. And she was the same age. We were both born in 1978. So I was 11 years old when she disappeared. And I used to do things like I'd go to Westgate Mall, ride my Huffy 2-speed bike over to this mall. And I would sit outside Walden Books and look through the crowds of people. And back then, you guys seem a little young to really remember when malls were out there at their height. But that's like, before we had the internet and everything, everybody was at the mall. I mean, it was always crowded, tons of people. And so I used to sit there and look as the people would go by. And if I saw somebody that looked like Amy's killer. You know, I would follow him until he went out to his car, and I'd jot down the license plate number, and then I'd run back to the payphone outside Aladdin's arcade, and I would call in the tip. You know, but of course the only number I knew back then by heart, you know, as far as law enforcement went, was 876-5353, which was the toll-free number for unsolved mysteries. So my tips were just going to some answering service for Robert Stack, and probably never made it to police. But yeah, for one reason or another, I was always obsessed with trying to help and solve that case, and always thought about it. So, you know, when I became a reporter for Cleveland Scene back in 2003, it was the first story I pitched, and then became my first book, and everything came after that.
Did you have like a fantasy at the time? Like, did you think about it, like, if I see this guy? Like, obviously you kind of already explained that you went and did the toll number, but did you ever have like a fantasy where you're like, if I see this guy, I'm just going to...
Yeah, for sure. I don't anymore. I think having kids kind of changes, and you realize the responsibility you have to others. But there was definitely a time where if I had known 100%, you know, who did it, yeah, I wanted to hurt this guy. But I've never been 100% certain. You know, there are suspects that have come up over the years that seem very good for it, and I have in my head a top three likely suspects, and one guy is far and above the others. But even him, I'm not 100% sure.
Are you talking about the guy in Florida?
Yeah. He was a former teacher in Amherst, and he had been teaching for 29 years. You know, and when you hit 30, you get your full pension. And they came to him. This would have been like 2003, 2004, somewhere around there. And they changed the laws in the state of Ohio, and all teachers had to be fingerprinted if they had. And he had been teaching long enough that nobody got his fingerprints when he started. So they came to him. They're like, "Hey, this is kind of annoying, and you know, you're going to hit your 30 next year, but we need to get your fingerprints." And he said, "No." It's like, "I'm not giving you my prints." And he quit teaching so that he didn't have to give the fingerprints, and he disappeared. And nobody knew where he was for 6 months, and then he shows up at a homeless shelter in Key West, Florida, which is as far from Bay Village as you can get without leaving the United States. So he's running from something, whether or not it's Amy Mihaljevic's case, I don't know, but he's the best suspect that I've ever seen.
Key West. Tyler, didn't you take your honeymoon in Key West?
Yeah, that was my honeymoon. It is like the most southern point in the United States, so that's great. Is he still alive and living there, or
no? James killed him.
Right.
I know. I was just trying to set him up to make him look violent. So, did you fantasize killing him? Did you kill him?
He as far as I know, he's still alive and well. He's very fit. You know, he's older. I think he's got to be in his 70s now. But if you saw him, you'd think he was like 55.
It's all that running he's doing.
Actually, yeah, he's a compulsive. He doesn't run. He's one of those speed walkers.
Oh,
so he wears these. Usually, you'll find him just with the tiniest shorts you can imagine, and you know, just walking. Speed walking down the road. Key West is a weird place, though. That's I think there's a, you know, if you want to hide out, you know, that's a good place to do it.
It's small, and it's interesting how like northern Key West is like it's a normal place. We got a Walmart, and then southern Key West is like a glorified Geneva on the Lake.
Yeah,
kind of.
Oh no,
that's the way I kind of viewed it.
Yeah, you know, but down there, what they have going, if you want to hide out, is you know, very nice weather, usually until you get those hurricanes.
Yeah.
But they've got a huge homeless population, and they have built up kind of these centers where, you know, like 100 homeless people can kind of hang out. So and that's what he did. He actually lived in an apartment that was paid through this homeless association for like 10 years.
Wow. I always imagined it would be a really great place for like an artist, because you could just go and you always have people coming in and out for like vacationing and such, and just play during Mallory Square, like during the sunset.
Oh, nice.
I mean, every time we went for the sunset there were just so many musicians and people painting and juggling and stuff. And if you have places to stay, it just seems like it'd be kind of a good place to go. So I'm not surprised to hear that.
So you said you're working on a book right now?
Yes. Yeah, I'm working on a couple. I have a new book that's finished that is a haunted house, kind of a gothic horror novel. And it's kind of, there's a book called Rebecca that's a classic horror book from, the last century that I read and loved. And I started thinking, like, what would it be like if the main character was a millennial? Like, how would a millennial deal with a haunted house? And so I said it at the campus, the University of Akron, where we met. Because when I would go to class, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but by Olin Hall is this old Victorian house called the Hauer House. And it's right by the frat house there, and it's actually part of the university. And so when I was teaching at the University of Akron, I started looking into it, investigating it, and I found out that it's actually part of the campus, and it used to be owned by the richest family in Akron, the Hauers, and they had one of the first phones in the city. So anybody that needed, to call for emergency or anything would run over to their house. To give you an idea of how early they were, like with the phones, their phone number was 19. So, anyways, the Hauers were this rich family, and eventually the matriarch of the family, Grace Hauer, she willed the house and property to the university on her death in the 70s under two conditions. And this is true, and this became the seed of the story. One, that two underclassmen women would always live there, and they'd get free room and board as long as they kept up the house and led tours and did logistics and things like that. And two, they were not allowed to bring men into the house after 8 p.m.
Wow.
So you ask why, and they're like, oh, it's just an old-timey thing. She didn't want it. But if you talk to the women that live there, they say the reason is because Grace's husband, before he died, said, if you bring any other man into this house after I die, I'm going to come back. And to this day, the women that live there say if their boyfriends stay past 8 p.m., the house gets angry.
Oh, my goodness.
The piano starts to play, and things start to move, and you see people in the hallway. Actually, we were talking a little earlier. My friend Bill Mankey, who edits the music and does the music for my podcast, he actually dated one of these women when we were in college, and he stayed the night there one night. And now the women that live in this house, they have two little dormitory rooms. And here's the weirdest part. This creeps me out. So the doors to their private rooms have a big plate of glass in them looking out into the hallway.
Okay.
And they have a sheer curtain over that gives them some privacy. But where else do you see a bedroom door that you can look through? That's
really strange.
It is strange. So he was with her one night, and it stayed past 8 o'clock, and they're sitting there on the bed, and he looks up, and he sees, no question about it, a man walk by in the hall.
Oh.
And nobody's home. The house has been closed for hours. And so at first they're too scared to check it out. And then eventually they get up the nerve and look through nobody's there. So stuff like that happens all the time.
I was not ready for a ghost story.
Oh my goodness. How much does paranormal stuff play into your everyday life? I know obviously you spend a lot of time with the true crime aspect, but
yeah.
How do you feel about paranormal conspiracies?
I love them. But I still consider myself a skeptic. I've written a book, about myths and monsters in Ohio called It Came from Ohio. And, but what I think what I learned investigating those stories and talking to people about these weird things that happen is that there's always, these weird things that happen, these paranormal things, these supernatural things. They always, if you trace them back far enough, you can find the nugget of truth that the nougat of truth in the middle of the paranormal chocolate bar, and then it just kind of gets taken out of proportion, and that becomes the legend. That becomes my best example of this is when I was looking into the melon heads of Kirtland. You're from Ashtabula.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the melon heads?
I have not. I've heard of Kirtland, though.
Okay.
But no, I've never heard of that.
Kirtland's a weird little town not too far from Ashtabula.
Right.
It's got this, it's just kind of old-timey. It's actually where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had their first headquarters. It's not very well known. But it's this kind of creepy little town. And they have this local legend there called the Melon Heads. And if you went to school and grew up in Kirtland, you would hear this story. And the story goes that there was this doctor that lived on Wisner Road. He was called Dr. Crow. And he lived there in the 1920s. And his wife, he was a doctor, but his wife was big into helping orphans. And so she built like a little orphanage on their property. And at night, Dr. Crow would experiment on the children. Oh. This is the legend. I don't,
Yeah.
The story goes that he was experimenting on these children, and he accidentally somehow made a couple of them immortal. But the side effect was that they had these abnormally large heads, like giant, like melon-sized heads. And the kids one day revolted, killed Dr. Crow and his wife, burned the hospital and the orphanage to the ground, and then ran out into the woods. And they say to this day there are tribes of melon heads that live in the woods. And if you park on Wisner Road, and that's where you would go and take your girlfriend and make out, and then you'd have a friend that would like come up and scrape his hand along the side of the car. And so I went to investigate this, and what I tracked down was some old residents of Wisner Road, and they're like, yes, there was a doctor there. His name was Dr. Crow, and yeah, his wife was into, a lot of this is true. He said, but here's what really happened. The doctor and his wife had a son, and he had I think the term is hydrocephalus, where there's water on the brain, and it causes your head to be abnormally large. And so because of this, they didn't enroll him into school. They homeschooled him at home. And his only interaction with the people in the town sometimes he would come outside near the road and he'd wave at people as they drove by. So that's the nugget of truth that over 50 years became the legend of these cannibalistic, immortal melon heads.
Have you tried to diagnose your friend's story about seeing the man walk by and maybe...
No, that I think was just a freaking ghost.
That story made me think of the Gore Orphanage. Remember when we were... Yeah. Because that was one of the ones...
it's a similar story, yeah.
Every last October for Halloween, we were going to pick a conspiracy story in Ohio and then like 1 week and then next week go to it because we upload these episodes on Thursday. And Thursday was Halloween.
Oh, great.
We ended up doing the Ashtabula River Railroad disaster instead because that was kind of my neck of the woods.
Yeah.
And we went to the Chestnut Grove Cemetery. But we were looking at the Gore Orphanage, but we weren't sure if we'd be able to find it because there was no article that was like, this is where you go. It's just the road.
I know it's on Gore Orphanage Road.
Yes. You know what?
It's a very long...
We'll start at one end. Charlie, you would start at one end. I would at the other end when we pass each other. Did you see it? I didn't see it.
That was one of my questions. Do you believe in ghosts and aliens and stuff?
Yeah. But
there was a delay. Yeah.
I think 99% of what people report as ghosts or aliens are probably easily explained. Maybe not easily, but can be explained away by other things. But there is a small percentage that I believe might be the real deal on both those things. And ghosts. Part of what my book is about this, and we're trying to find a publisher for it right now, and it's circulating and people are reading it. Hopefully, it'll find a nice little home. But one of the things I get into is like, if ghosts are real, what are the rules, or are there no rules, or what is it all about? My favorite theory for what a ghost is when you die. I was very close with my grandfather, and I was very lucky in that nobody in my immediate family died until I was, and we're talking aunts, uncles, grandparents, until I was like 22. And then my grandfather passed away. And I have a very vivid dream about 3 months after he passed away where he came to me. And I was very upset about it. And he came and just explained that I don't need to be upset. And the way he explained it to me in this vision is my favorite explanation for a ghost, which is he said, I've passed through and I'm on the other side. And what you're seeing now, what you're feeling, what you're sensing is an echo. Sometimes we leave behind echoes. Just like when a jet passes through the sound barrier, it's on the other side, but you hear this tremendous clap. So that's what I like for an explanation for ghosts. And, with UFOs and aliens and stuff, I think the universe is so vast, there has to be stuff out there. And I think what we're seeing in the last couple of years is fascinating because the mainstream, the real media is picking up on it. The New York Times is writing about these sightings that are fighter jets.
Oh, like disclosure and stuff from the Navy?
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
And there's footage of these like little Tic Tac shaped things over the ocean off the coast of San Diego, and that defy all laws of physics. And it's something. Even if it's not an alien, whatever the explanation for that is just as fascinating. If you're telling me it's a new form of life or something interdimensional, or it defies what we know right now.
Have you ever looked into something like that, or is it just kind of something passing by that you enjoy and are intrigued by?
I've done a little, there was one case that I've done a lot of research in, and at one time I thought maybe a book, but, I don't know, but, it was, I do write about it a little bit, and it came from Ohio, but fascinating case from 1966, where, sheriff's deputies from Portage County were driving along, 224, not far from here, and, it was about 4:00 in the morning, and they're in a cruiser and they're responding to an abandoned vehicle, and they stop, and there's a truck parked on the side of the road, and the owner's nowhere to be seen, and they shine a flashlight into the truck, and they see all this weird electronical equipment and some signs that maybe it might be military. And at that moment, something rises out of the forest beside the road, and it glows so bright it's like daylight. And they describe it as, I think one of them described it as kind of an upside down melting ice cream cone, which is hard to picture. But it was kind of like saucer shaped almost, but it had this like little, like an ice cream cone upside down. It had this little point on one end. And it looks actually a lot like what was in that footage, that the New York Times investigated about the jets. Anyways, it hovers over the road, and then takes off down old Route 14, and these deputies chase it in their car, and they chase it for over 100 miles, going over 100 miles an hour, and along the way, another police cruiser joins the chase, and they chase this thing all the way into Pennsylvania before the cruiser dies, and this thing shoots up into space.
Oh, I remember that story it came from Ohio. I remember reading that one. I was like, I gotta turn some lights on.
Wow.
I love that story because it has such credible witnesses. These are trained sheriff's deputies. They would know that they're not chasing the planet Venus or swamp gas or a weather balloon. This was a craft of some sort. And, there were four different cops chasing this thing at a certain time. In fact, the sheriff or the chief of police in Manaway took a picture of it, and when I wrote about it at Scene, we got a copy of the picture, and it looks like a flying saucer. Wow. over the town.
I can't believe this is not where I saw this interview going.
This is great. I like the point you made though, where it's like just because, like, it's still fascinating even if it's not alien.
Right.
Like, you can
it's still something we don't know.
Yes, and that's still exciting because I think it's a little bold to just assume something is alien. Like, it's fun to think.
What if it's the Chinese? What if they're so far advanced? That we're screwed, that is fascinating too. So we should figure out what it is.
Does the flat world theory piss you off, or how do you feel?
I just heard that. You mean the theory that the world is flat?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that upsets me a little bit because it kind of like it detracts from these conspiracy theories that might turn out to be true.
Yeah.
Now that we're on the subject of these weird conspiracy theories, my favorite conspiracy theory is the subject of phantom time. Do you know anything about phantom time?
Phantom time.
Is that like the Mandela effect?
Almost.
Okay.
Kind of. It could play into it a little bit. The idea of phantom time is the subject. Like I wrote this novel in 2015 called The Great Forgetting, and it gets into this topic. And the idea is that our calendar's wrong, that we're not living in 2020, that leaders in the past have altered the calendar for one reason or another, and we're missing chunks of history. So here's the best example. The most likely is this Pope. This was when popes were, not just religious leaders, but also political leaders and ran Europe. This was Pope, I think Felix or something like that, a weird name. But he would have been Pope in the early 900s, 900 AD.
Okay.
And the theory goes that he wanted to be, they thought that Jesus might come back at the millennia. So he wanted to be known in history as the Pope at the turn of the millennia. So somewhere around 920 AD, he tells everybody, we're rewriting the calendar. Next year is 1000 AD.
Oh, so you just skipped 100 years.
So they skipped, 100 years. So it's not really, well, that would mean that it's not 2020, it's actually 1920 now because we lost those 100 years.
Now it's the Roaring 20s.
Right. And what does that matter? I don't know. It only matters if we've altered the calendar in a way where we're missing history. And what do we miss in there? So I don't know. It probably doesn't mean anything in the long run, but it's a really trippy idea that maybe it's not really 2020.
It is, but it also makes you think like, time's an illusion anyway. You know
That's
what I mean?
right. Yeah.
So I mean, it's all relative.
I've been listening to a lot of Alan Watts lately, and if you haven't, you should check him out because he has some really great ideas about time. But and you get into Buddhism, and I've been studying that a lot lately, and I really like the idea that time is mostly an illusion, and that everything is just right now. Everything is happening right now.
So, switching topics a little bit, a right turn. Although I've been enjoying this very much. So, how crazy was it for you? Because, like in the early 2000s, where if there was a story, it was either like word of mouth or it was the major networks showing something, you'd watch it on the news. Versus now, where if something crazy happens in a random deli in New York City, you have one camera angle and everybody has that perspective. And then like later on in the thread, somebody's like, oh, I came in from this camera angle. So all of that to say, how much has like social media's growth kind of changed the way you go about things or like how you view things in terms of like...
it's changed it completely for the worse and for the better. There's just no going back to how it was. I wish we could go back to when there were 3 competing daily newspapers in Cleveland and everybody had reporters and there were jobs. But, a lot of the reporters I worked with, even at Scene 2003, are no longer working in journalism because social media killed it. But it was interesting to see happen because I was there as it was. I was at Scene when we decided to put up a website and nobody knew how, what to put on there. Yeah. Why would we put the paper on there? Then nobody would pick up the paper. And then Twitter and Facebook and MySpace at first. And I remember realizing that I could use social media to fish for leads. And so I would, this was back in 2004, probably 2004. And I would send out these notices and say, hey, here's a story I'm working on. Does anybody have any thoughts or connections? And, other reporters were like, what are you doing? Somebody's going to scoop you. You can't tell people what you're working on. But then, within another year or two, every reporter was doing that.
What platform were you using in
I'm
2004?
trying to remember because Facebook didn't launch until February 2004. I think some of it was MySpace.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Wow. When did you start using Reddit?
I started using Reddit in, I think, 2011. I was a little late to that, but Reddit is its own little beast.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with Reddit, if you use Reddit, it's a big deal. If you don't know what Reddit's about, you don't realize the influence. But it's tough though because you've created a system where everybody feels that they're entitled to a story, and what they have to say about it is just as important as this professor who studied the subject for 50 years, and it muddies the water, and it leads to having presidents that have no reason to be president, and it's unfortunately I think it's more. And this is now I'm 42 and I'm starting to sound like an old man, but it was better before Twitter and Facebook. It was, and I try to make a point now to put my phone down and get away from it, but it's very hard, because it's addicting.
It is addicting. And it's like you don't want to miss an opportunity too.
Yeah.
I have an app on my phone now. I was telling Tyler this on the car right here. That is just crime. It's called the Citizen app. They don't have it in Cleveland yet, but there's like New York and like LA. I like to look at the crime that's happening.
Oh, it's just like constant posts about crimes?
It's like a map and like little dots show up.
Wow.
You wouldn't be very helpful from here in Ohio.
Not right now. Maybe when they come here it will be.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Based on your experience, if someone came up to you and they were like, "Hey James, I am a huge fan. I want to do what you do." Would you be encouraging, or would you kind of like warn them a little bit?
I don't even know what it is that I do. It's hard to define.
Okay, I'll make it more specific, make it easier. If somebody's like, "Hey, I think it's awesome that you go out of your way to investigate these crimes,"
okay,
and you get so involved in it, it's like you're not a passerby doing it. Like you make it what you're doing. Would you encourage somebody to do that, or like based on your experiences, would you kind of maybe shy them away or point them in a different direction?
Yeah, I don't know that I would. I don't know that I would tell them not to do it. Although there are times where I wish I'd never ever gotten involved with true crime. But I think I would just give them some tips and some cautionary advice about what not to do. And that's if you're investigating a crime and the family does not want that attention or doesn't want you involved, cut your losses and move on to a new case. And, do it by the book, be nice to everybody, do your research, don't make assumptions and, or speculation, don't speculate as to what happened. It's okay to say, I don't know yet, and continue to investigate.
Was that ever intimidating, like driving long distances and just like, "Hi, I'm here to investigate"? Was it like, is that something that gives you anxiety, or was it? Yes.
I was going to say, especially the family of the Murray case.
Yeah. Was it Fred?
Yeah. Well, Fred's the father. Yeah.
Right.
That's actually my favorite part of it is showing up and talking to people.
Okay.
And with the Maura Murray case and the Amy Mihaljevic cases, I mean, sometimes I would show up at a suspect's door or somebody that was close to the case, and it would be dark, and 7, 8 o'clock at night, and I'm alone and I'm knocking, and I at the time I liked the thrill of it, what might happen, and it was I've been told by at least one therapist that it was probably a little bit of a death wish or thrill-seeking behavior. And, my book on the Maura Murray case is called True Crime Addict because it is like an addiction, and I was working at like an addiction for a while, and I would caution against that. But no, I like, as a journalist, I've always liked that you're not entitled to answers, but it gives you the permission to ask those questions. If I was just somebody, that wasn't working in journalism, just, passing by and, you met somebody involved with a case or a police officer and you asked them about the case, they're like, who are you? Take a hike. But, as a journalist, you get to go to those places and you get to ask those questions and you get to meet the police. And a lot of times they'll share things with you. And that's the fun part.
My favorite part of True Crime Addict is where you told your wife you have to go back. And she's like, okay, be safe. And you're like, okay, well, the next line, I was driving down the road drunk. And I was like, oh my God. So how did your wife?
I was in a bad place. I was in a dark place.
I gathered that. Yeah. How did your wife react to that scene with the strip club?
She doesn't care about the strip
really
club stuff. Yeah, no.
Maybe it's because we're young, but my wife would have tore my head off.
Yeah, we'd be dead.
I grew. My wife and I, we've known each other since we were kids, and she's wonderful, and I wouldn't be able to do this stuff without her. We have a great relationship, and it's always been honest and lots of communicating, and she doesn't have any jealousy. I don't have any jealousy. I don't know that I've been to a strip club since then, but when I was in my 20s and early 30s, that would be something that occasionally I would do with my buddies. We'd go, and one guy would have a birthday, and I remember there was this strip club called XTC in Akron, and we'd take one of our friends there for his birthday, and then we'd pay to have 3 women with him up on stage, and and he would get a nice birthday spanking, and so it was never a secretive thing, and I was so I think as long as I told her where I was and what I was doing, but that of course changed when the kids came along, and you have to start acting a little bit better, I guess.
That makes sense. So what's been your biggest inspiration in terms of writing and like your writing style, like especially in the True Crime Addict, like the short chapters, like bite size,
oh sure,
just concise? Is that something? Did you have an inspiration for that, or how did that come about?
Something about those cases and investigating these mysteries, because you're talking to so many different people and you're in so many different situations, it almost lends itself to small chapters like that. But when I specifically keep in mind what works for other writers and what people like to read. So whenever I write a new book, I set 2 books next to where I'm writing, and I'll read one of them for inspiration for pacing and language and grammar, and the other book would be specifically for structure. How are they structuring the chapters? How many chapters are there? How would they treat this turn? So I think for Primrose Lane and also for True Crime Addict, there were 2 books that I was thinking about a lot. One was The World According to Garp by John Irving for language and pacing. And for structure on those books, I looked to Dan Brown and the Da Vinci Code. And what Dan Brown does well, and you talk to the literary critics in New York that are stuck up, and
they hate him. They hate him
because he's not very literary. He's not the best writer, but he's a great storyteller.
Right.
And what he learned to do was turn a book into essentially crack. If a normal author's book is cocaine, he figured out how to make a nice rock of crack. And what he does is he keeps the chapters short, and each chapter ends on a cliffhanger and leads into the next chapter. So you literally can't put it down because it's like, oh my God, it doesn't feel finished. I got to see what happens. And then that chapter leads to the next cliffhanger. And I think to some extent when you're investigating a case like this, that's real life. I mean, it feels like that when you're lost in it. So it was a very conscious decision to work it that way.
Yeah, I tore through that book when I was in high school.
Da Vinci Code?
Yeah.
I loved Angels and Demons. It was like 700 pages and my sister gave it to me and I was like, no way. And then like a week later, I was like, I just looked at it in my hand, and now I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I'll get to it.
I love the Lord of the Ring references in
thanks.
the book, in the
Thanks.
everything. You assume you're a fan of Tolkien.
Oh, of course. Yep.
Yeah.
I remember reading those in high school and just being lost in the language and the words and the adventure of it.
So what was it now? I think, it's in True Crime Addict, where you have a couple chapters about how you are not the kindest to a judge who's not the kindest to you. And
I end up in jail.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad you're not a felon though, so that's good.
Yeah, me too.
But I was wondering if you listened to Serial season 3.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, did that like hit some
My judge
home?
was in there.
I thought he was.
Yes.
I wasn't sure.
Yes, no, that was so for your listeners, the short version of the story is that my sister had this really large dog, and I told, it was like a pit bull, and I told her, you got to get rid of this thing. It's gonna cause trouble, and she didn't. And sure enough, she got in trouble with the game warden, and she had to go to court to appear because her dog scared some other dog. And but there was this young man who worked for the dog catchers, the game warden or whatever it is, and animal control, and he became infatuated with my sister and started to stalk her. And I didn't hear about any of this until the night before she was due in court, and my mom calls me upset. She's like, "We got to tell you what's going on," and she's going to be in court, and this guy's going to be in court the next day. So I'm like, okay, I'll be there. So I show up in court, and it's Lakewood, and it's this old cantankerous judge, Judge Carroll, and this young man from Animal Control's there, and he's like leering at my sister. And so she's called up, and I stand up with her, and I walk up, and he's like, "Whoa!" He's like, "Are you her lawyer?" And I'm like, "No. I'm just her brother, but there's something about this case you should know. I got to tell you something." He's like, "If you're not her lawyer, I don't want you to say anything." And I'm like, "Yeah, Judge Carroll, I've been a reporter in this town for a few years. I know how courts work. It's me, come on." And he's like, "I need you out of my courtroom." And I'm like, "Well, I'm going to have my say." I'm like, "This guy's stalking my sister, and you need to do something about it." And he said, "If you say one more word, I'm going to find you in contempt." And so that little asshole that lives in my head opens up the Rolodex and starts going, it's like, "Well, what do we know about Judge Carroll? That if we're going to say one thing, what's the worst thing we could say right now?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, he's big into AA." So he says, "If you say one more thing, I'm going to find you in contempt." And I say, "Judge, you're nothing but a drunk." And the whole room just gasped.
Oh, man.
And I turned my back, and I'm not proud of this, by the way. It's a story that I tell now, but it was the beginning of a terrible, terrible year, and realizing that I had a problem, an addiction problem too, because that morning I was probably still a little high because I was over drinking, and I was smoking weed, and I was taking oxycodone when I didn't need to be, and because it made me feel good. And so I'm pretty messed up. So I say this terrible thing to the judge, and I walk out, and I get one step into the hall, and I feel somebody grab me, and they toss me across the hallway into the wall. And I thought it was that animal control officer. So when I feel this guy's hands on my arms and then my wrist pulling me back, I grab him, and I don't know where the strength came from, but I tossed him over my shoulder like a bale of hay, and he lands on his back, and I realize that's not the animal control officer. That's a police officer. And he jumps up, and he pulls his taser because I'm white. And so I say, "Don't tase me, bro." And anyways, I ended up getting arrested, and I served 10. I was sentenced to 10 days for the contempt of court, which is ridiculous. But I also was charged with assault on a police officer, which is a felony that carries a possible prison term of 8 years. So I was in a lot of trouble. Now, I didn't start the fight with the police officer. I was walking away. I didn't want to fight anybody. I was walking away. This guy literally threw me into a wall without provocation. But it was his word against mine. There was one person in the hallway that saw this whole thing. First thing we did, though, was go to the prosecutor, and we're like, well, there were cameras all over that hallway. Can we see the video? And the prosecutor's like, the strangest thing, man. The cameras weren't taping that day.
Yeah, that's really weird.
Yeah.
That's so
How
strange.
convenient.
And I'm like, well, what about that woman that was in the hallway that saw everything? They're like, well, we wouldn't even know how to find her. Where do we start? So I went back home, and I went through the docket of the court that day and found the name of everybody that had to appear for a speeding ticket. And I cross-referenced those names, and there was over 200. I cross-referenced those names with Facebook profiles.
Oh, my God.
And I found that woman.
That is so dedicated.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, when you're facing 8 years in
That-
prison,
you know what, that's
Felony
true.
on the line, yeah.
That's true.
you become very clever. So we sent a private investigator out because I couldn't have contact with her. We sent a private eye to her house and had her write her version of the story. And she's like, absolutely. This guy was just walking away, and this cop came up behind him, like threw him, through the air into the wall. And so once she did that, they tossed out the charge, which is a long way of saying the judge I went in front of, I think it's Judge Russo, was a wild guy. And he would say the craziest things. But I remember one of the things he told me is like, if you keep doing what you're doing, knocking on people's doors and asking them if they're a murderer, you're going to get yourself killed. Stop it. And so anyways, he ends up becoming a big part of Serial Season 3.
Yeah.
He's one of the judges in that because of the crazy things he says in court. But yeah, no, that was my year-long battle to stay out of prison.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's such a good story.
Yeah, no, it's funny talking about that story and possibly going to prison because that was happening concurrently with me teaching those courses at the University of Akron. And I was terrified that, I was going to lose that job. And
Yeah, I had no idea. I was just like worried about my grades.
So what made you want to start the philosophy of crime?
Well, I realized that, the simple answer is there's this opportunity for these true crime podcasts, and there's so many, right? I wanted to play in that field. I wanted to play in that sandbox, but I wanted to find a new way to do it. And I would hear these crime stories, and I would think, well, wouldn't it be interesting if they talked about this? And, I realized that a lot of what I wanted to say about crime kind of intersected with philosophy. And it was getting to the big questions behind these things. And I would read these stories about, why is true crime so popular? And people would ask. And I had an answer for that I'm like, why isn't anybody talking about it? It's pretty obvious to me. And so I decided to start this podcast, The Philosophy of Crime, which talks about these big questions behind true crime. Why are we obsessed with true crime? Even like, do lie detectors really work? Or how does criminal profiling work? Is it fair? Why do we still have the death penalty? And it goes to classical philosophy for answers, because I think that's where a lot of the answers to the big questions still lie. And so the first episode I did was, why is true crime so popular? Why are we obsessed with it? And I looked and traced it back to, well, you got to start with Serial, because without Serial, you wouldn't have had that explosion of the podcast. But you wouldn't have Serial without the book, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, because that opened the door to this idea of citizen detectives with Elizabeth Slander and, this broken down journalist. And so that inspired people to do their own investigating, and Sarah Koenig comes along and kind of does the dragon tattoo as a real thing in real time. So you go from Serial to Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Well, what inspired Stieg Larsson to write that book? And it was a couple cases that happened in Sweden, true crime cases, but also he was writing it during right before and in the aftermath of September 11th. And if you read that story, it definitely informs a lot of what happens in there, and the mood, and this concern about the future, and true crimes as a substitution for it. So I really think our obsession with true crime began when these planes crashed into the buildings, and we realized that we live in a world without answers. Without that, we don't live in a black and white world anymore. We live in a world that's going through an existential crisis, and we're trying to figure out if we can ever be safe again. And one of the ways we're doing that is by exploring these mysteries that don't have answers.
Do you? Because that podcast is more season based. Do you approach it before you even start recording? Do you know what every episode's going to be about?
Yes.
Okay. Which it feels that way too. It feels very put together. So I was just curious about the production.
Like us.
Yeah, last week, this week, who knows? I don't even know what month it is. But it felt very put together and concise. So I was curious about kind of like the production behind that, like how long that whole process takes.
Yeah, I always forget how long it takes, and then I get into the next season, and it's like, oh my god. No. So first thing I do is come up with 6 ideas. 6 things that I want to talk about. What are the topics going to be this year? And then I'll start, I got to figure out, well, what case, because each episode, while I'm talking about these big ideas, I always wrap it around a real true crime case. So I'm still talking about some of these crimes. Usually it's like 2 or 3 different ones. So I come up with the topics, and then I research each topic and figure out how to fit philosophy into it. So there's a lot of research that goes into it. I'd say it takes about 2 weeks to research and write out every episode. And then each season 6 episodes. So it's a good month and a half to 2 months of just writing and research. And then, I go into this recording studio up in Fairlawn and record it. And then my buddy Bill Mankey edits and does the music.
Is that Fearful Symmetry Productions? Or, because I know that's like your kind of like theory, but at the end of the episodes, we're like a Fearful Symmetry.
Fearful Symmetry is my company.
Okay.
I don't talk about this a lot, but I have probably about 5 years ago, I formed a corporation, and all of my little projects kind of go through. So I don't get paid by, when I publish a book, or I've been doing a lot of writing for TV lately. They don't pay me; they pay Fearful Symmetry, and then, I get checks from Fearful Symmetry. So,
gotcha.
Otherwise, I'd only be getting paid like twice a year. But this is a way to get kind of the steady paychecks going. So yeah, no, I am Fearful Symmetry is there for like podcasts and hopefully more fun stuff in the future, like TV and movies. With
them being scripted episodes, like in episodes between 30, some of them were like 30 and some of them were higher, like in the 50-minute range. How much is actually recorded when you hand it over to get edited? Like, I imagine it's not one take. Like how long does it take you to do one of those episodes?
Actually, it's all, because I did that much planning, and I write out my script.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no ad lib or improv while I'm doing it. So it really is, it's the same process I go through when I record an audiobook. I'll write a book, and I've been lucky enough where they'll let me do the audio version of the book. And so, it's just sitting there and reading through it and getting the right tone. And
a theatrical reading, essentially.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's not like our bullshit.
But I have great appreciation for that, because
too.
We just kind of turn on and trust our instincts to be able to make it entertaining, where there's so much more planning and research and process behind that.
At the same time, though, it's a very lonely way to do a podcast, because it's just me, through the whole thing.
That's true.
I don't have somebody else to play off of.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that your experience writing novels aid you in that. I actually struggle writing because it's a singular activity. I much prefer, and maybe this is a younger person thing, that's what people have told me, but I really prefer collaborating.
Yeah.
And
that's good. I had a lot of trouble with collaboration just in everything I did until pretty recently, and I've gotten pretty decent at it, but I'm very antisocial by nature. And so I've lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
But no, I think it's good that you can collaborate. As far as writing, oh, I know what I was going to say. You talked about wanting to write a novel and having trouble sitting down and getting into your personal headspace. But you mentioned earlier too that you were reading It. I think. Now, it's a very good example of how a novel can be written in a way that tricks the mind of the writer, because you think of, oh my God, it has to be so daunting writing a 1,000-page novel like that. It's but if you look at it, it's not really a novel. It's a collection of 12 short stories.
Right.
And that's the way, because you've got the 6 kids, and you get a creepy story about each of them in the past, and then a creepy story about each of them in the present. And that's the way that I was able to trick myself into finishing a book, is just taking it chapter by chapter and thinking, well, each chapter's a short story, and I can write a short story.
Yeah.
And then it's you're playing mind tricks with yourself, but that seems to help.
That's probably a good way just to tackle life, like just in chunks, so nothing gets too overwhelming.
To live in the present.
It's how I'm doing semester by semester, Can I ask you a question about it's a little not on the same page.
No, I'm good with the podcast. I just want to make sure we touch. Well,
it is kind of with the podcast. Did you see Don't Fuck with Cats?
No, I don't watch a lot of true crime because I will ultimately get obsessed with that crime.
Okay.
It's like introducing a new drug to an addict. It's like, have you tried this fentanyl? It's really good, man. So I try to avoid it, but no, I know what it is.
Okay, because I was thinking about it. I liked it a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's like it's the whole idea with the internet sleuth.
Yeah.
It's got that whole kind of. That's what it's about, basically.
I think the best thing we could do for society is get rid of anonymity on the internet. I think that would take away a lot of the issues with social media right now, but I don't know that they'll ever get around to doing that.
Yeah. Some of the meanest things are said by people with egg profiles. That's just a fact.
Well, it's like 8:20.
Yeah.
I hope that maybe this isn't the last interview we have with you.
Yeah. But seriously, James, we appreciate your time. We appreciate you coming on the podcast. Dude, you weave such a good tale.
Thanks.
Because we write all these questions down because we're like, we can't have dead space. Even with editing, we want to eliminate dead space. And then I find myself ignoring the questions and just like it's like I'm watching TV and just like, oh, he's telling this story about this house in Akron that's haunted.
I know, right?
This is perfect.
It's a lot of practice.
Yeah.
And it's a conscious thing that I have. After we're done here, I'm going to get back in my car and drive home, and I'm going to be beat. After IHOP, though. Yeah, right. I'll probably pass IHOP. But no, it takes a lot of energy. And, just like, your background in improv, if you don't know anything about improv, you think it's magic. But if you study improv, it's like, oh, there are all these little tricks, and you have to remember it's the yes and, and it's having these situations in the back of your mind that you can pull from your bag of tricks when somebody shouts out, what's the location? Decatur. All right, let's do it. And it's like that with these podcasts and appearances, and when you're speaking publicly, there are tricks and habits just like improv that help.
Well, I hope to one day leave that in there. Hopefully, one day I can get to that level because we really was a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thanks. No, you guys are off to a good start.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for listening. Please check out JamesRenner.com, correct?
Yeah.
So we won't get into this. This is a question, but there will be a season 3, right? A Philosophy of Crime this spring.
Should be coming out in March.
Yeah, always the springtime.
It just works out that way.
Okay, I don't want to get.
It's not a symbol of new birth.
No.
Sure. Any other plugs that you want to throw out there?
No. If you're interested in any of the stories, you can find them anywhere books are sold and online. And JamesRenner.com has everything you need.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Make sure to subscribe. And as always, this is The Segue.
The best thing to happen to you on a Thursday evening.
I feel like I've been...
Yeah, it's fine. No, it's fine. Actually, how about you take one? I'll look.
Okay. All right. So